My name's Mark Zimmerman.
I'm Gabrielle Collins.
And once again on the program, this is the third time this month for our friend Dr. Glen Duerr from Cedarville University. Good morning, Glen.
Good morning.
So it's the mornings with Mark and
Gabe and
Glen now, too. So thank you very much for having some time for us this morning, because I know school is just underway down at Cedarville, and we appreciate your time. Dr. Glen Duerr is the Associate Professor of International Studies at Cedarville University.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Glen, we're going to talk this morning about the disaster in Afghanistan. And my first question for you would be, how did we get to this point that we got to yesterday?
Absolutely. Afghanistan is an incredibly complex country that sits at the apex of three different regions and is very geostrategically important between South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East as well. For the last 42 years, it's been on and off in a state of war, albeit with different levels of intensity, including the Soviet Union that lasted through 1988, three separate but connected civil wars that moved through 2001, wherein the Taliban government housed al-Qaeda that perpetrated the heinous 9/11 attacks on our country and really the wider philosophy of freedom throughout the world. And then for the last 20 years, there's been a NATO mission in Afghanistan that's recently wound down. The government opted to withdraw, and then a major and brutal terrorist attack yesterday that has killed dozens, including at least 13 U.S. service members. And so a very, very difficult day in an area that continues to be war-prone and continues to be mired in poverty as well, despite the fact that there's significant mineral resources in the country too.
Dr. Glen Duerr with us once again from Cedarville University. So, Glen, now we have, according to the latest news report we just heard at the top of the hour from Town Hall News, many countries have finished their evacuation efforts. They are done. They have completed what they came to do, and they're out. America is going to stay at least until Tuesday, from what we understand. And we're hearing from I believe it's the Catholic News Service this morning, that many, many Christians, thousands of them in Afghanistan, will not be able to leave the country before next Tuesday. So we were texting yesterday, Glen, and I don't think I've ever asked you a question like this on this program before. But I'm giving you a field promotion at this point. And the question is, Glen, if you were President of the United States right now, what would be your next move in these next few days?
Well, thanks for the promotion, but I would not have left. I would have maintained a small NATO troop force between 2,500 and 5,000 troops, with the ability to call in air support from Incirlik Air Force Base in Turkey, from Qatar, from Kuwait as different places to support South Korea, Japan, a lot of bases in the near area, and I would not have evacuated Bagram or 6 other U.S. And NATO force bases in the territory. And the reason being is, even though there's not a lot of popularity for staying in Afghanistan, and it's America's longest war, quote unquote, it has ceased being a major war for some time. The last U.S. service member was killed in February of 2020. It's not to say that Afghanistan is peaceful, but it's to say that the Taliban was in a box and could be contained. The U.S. also has a long history of doing this. Some of the aforementioned countries, but also Germany historically. But we keep troops in Kuwait. Those have been successful. The UN also has about a dozen active peacekeeping operations. It too keeps minimal forces in place to keep the lid on things. And sometimes these can be very good over the long term in terms of maintaining stability. And so that's the decision I would have made. In terms of what it's like now, it's a very, very difficult situation. But certainly there is a commitment to our citizens, and likewise, I think citizens from other countries that have been left. It's not being evacuated now is a very, very difficult circumstance, and I think by not maintaining the commitment, it's going to be more difficult to maintain alliances across the world moving forward. It's going to reduce the latitude of future presidents to maintain their word when talking to allies or potential allies alike. So this is a very difficult time and has to be managed very carefully.
Dr. Glenn, a lot of us are concerned about the Christians that have been left, that haven't been evacuated. The news is basically reporting that priority is being given to women at risk, journalists, academics, pilots, and some minority populations. There doesn't seem to be priority that includes the Christians there. Can you give us any updates on what the plan is for that?
It doesn't look like there's a strong plan. And again, Afghanistan is complex. Its largest ethnic minority group, the Pashtuns, make up 42% of the population. The second largest is the Tajik population, connected to the ethnic Tajiks in Tajikistan, which is a neighbor to the northeast. And so it depends on location in the country. In some places, the Taliban has already been brutal. There have been reports of them taking young girls, 12, 13, 14, forced marriages, etc. There's some brutal activities. Some people have died. Some Christians have been killed. Many other minorities have been killed outside of the glare and the spotlight of the media in Kabul. But at the same time, Afghanistan is very difficult to control. When the Taliban was last in power from 1996 to 2001, even though they governed the country, they only ever controlled about 3/4 of it. And there are long-standing hotbeds of protest against the Taliban. We've seen that in Jalalabad, in the east of the country, and just the evidence of ISIS Khorasan, its continued existence, also speaks to groups, however recalcitrant, that will oppose the Taliban as well. So it really depends on location within the country. It's going to be very difficult for Christians, for any Shia minority, for any social or religious minority outside of a very firm allegiance to the Taliban. This is going to be a difficult time, but the good news is there are pockets where it's going to be helpful. There are surrounding countries that will provide some level of aid as well. I also anticipate fully that China will get heavily involved economically at some point as a means of building its Belt and Road Initiative. A significant portion of that goes through what's called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think China will look to exploit the mineral resources in Afghanistan and will try and create some form of deal with the Taliban in that way.
Glen, thank you so much. And that's something else you just mentioned that I never even thought of, the significant minority of Shia Muslims in the country. Nobody's talking about the fact that they are also in danger in the current situation, because not all Muslims think the same way, correct?
Absolutely. And frankly, a lot of moderate Sunni Muslims are in grave danger as well. Anyone that's non-practicing, anyone that's just, trying to figure out where do they fit, seeking, different viewpoints, all are in heavy jeopardy at this point. But it also could descend very rapidly. ISIS has been moving troops and money from Syria and Iraq into the Khorasan, the region, the Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia region. And I don't know that they have a large enough force to take on the Taliban, but they may utilize guerrilla-style Taliban tactics against the Taliban. In some ways, what we saw yesterday in terms of terrorist attacks. And so it could be used on the Taliban. which is an irony in terms of what they've been doing over the course of the last 20 years against U.S. and NATO troops. So there's a lot that's still in play. I don't know that it's going to return to any form of stability. When the Soviets withdrew in 1988, it kicked off this restive period where there were three distinct civil wars with overlap. And there's something like that could be the next step, the next stage in Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Dr. Glen Duerr from Cedarville University, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time so much. Glen, as always, if there are parents, maybe even grandparents out there who have a child or a grandchild who might be interested in Cedarville University and entering into that school maybe 1 year from now, how can they find out more information?
Thank you, Mark and Gabe, for having me. It's cedarville.edu is the easiest access point online. That's cedarville.edu.
Thank you, Glen.
Yeah.
You've been so helpful this morning. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Glen.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Glen Duerr. Okay.
You know, you're going to have him on standby.
I know. But here's what I want to say. And I'm just not going to be, I don't know, getting crazy here and getting too effusive about this, but I just learned more in the last 7 minutes than I learned in 2 hours of watching cable news last night.
Well, because you were talking to Dr. Glen Duerr, of course.
Exactly. That's all I'm going to say.